I came out of this movie having relatively enjoyed it, but the more I sat on it afterwards, the worse I felt about it, especially after seeing the interview with the film's co-director Stephanie Stein. I highly recommend looking at this if you haven't yet, and the link to it is in the description. As far as what makes this movie bad, the handling of all four of the villains is generally the worst part. Don't be confused, this movie only has one villain in a villainous role, the new one, Chameleon, but it humiliates each of the three villains from the past movies extensively. Let's start with the two villains who have the least amount of screen time. Shen and Kai from Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3. Neither of them talk whatsoever in the film. They, along with the Furious Five, are exclusively cameos. According to the Stephanie interview, they couldn't bring them back because their voice actors would cost too much. They were very late additions to the movie because the staff were big fans and wanted them to be there for the sake of it. They were added in so late that their models were supposedly made up of sticks and glue due to being rushed, with no place to insert them into the script. Even if they wanted to insert more scenes for them, Stephanie says they're banned due to mandates on a maximum run time for the movie, because of it being deemed a kids' film and suggesting that kids have no attention span. As a big fan of Shen and Kai, their roles in this really just dishonored them, to the point I much would have preferred if they just weren't in it at all, considering all the limitations this movie has. You could argue that the cameos of these two old bad guys aren't enough to more actively hold against the movie, but the issue is the villains are a primary source of marketing. Come see Kung Fu Panda 4, where all of Poe's past villains come to fight against him once again. They're trying to cash in on that Spider-Man No Way Home train with nostalgia baiting with old beloved villain characters. I would have absolutely loved a movie in that style for these three villains if I'm being honest, but it was just a cheap bait and switch. It would be one thing if the cameos these two guys had were just generic ones like what the Fearsome Five got, but no, these cameos are actively insulting. Right off the bat, the only reason they're here is to get revived from the spirit realm by Chameleon, the new villain, and then she steals their powers and instantly defeats them in one hit. After that, they spend the rest of the movie in cages. Amazing, great start. That's already a pretty big embarrassment as an excuse to bring them back. Their other primary scene is at the end of the movie, after everything has already happened. The portal to the spirit realm is opened back up, and all three old villains walk through it willingly, which I find really dumb and out of character, basically walking to their deaths. Yes, I know Kai and Shen are not a focus in this scene, well, they're not a focus in any scene being honest, but wouldn't it have been easy to just write it in such a way where most of the villains are forcibly sucked back into the portal? Tai Lung can have his scene because he's the only one allowed to speak since they actually paid his voice actor, but for the others, just make them get sucked through against their will. Going on to the characters more specifically, we'll start with Shen. Shen is generally the most evil character in the series. You would think the man would have gone past the point of no return after exterminating all of the pandas, but even after that, he is given multiple opportunities by the soothsayer and Poe to change his path back onto the right track. The man is clearly too far gone to change his ways. I'm not going to say it's 100% impossible he somehow found peace and enlightenment and thought on what everybody was saying to him in the afterlife, but that's the kind of thing we need to actually see, not be indirectly told through his actions. Without showing it, I have no reason to believe he changed. When he's given no screen time at all, why should I think his character updated in any way from how we last saw him in Kung Fu Panda 2? General Kai is probably the most out-of-character one of all. The best thing to come out of this film is that he's finally getting some retroactive praise that he deserved because there's now a villain worse than him. I'm not going to pretend he's better than the other two on an objective level with this more minimal backstory, but he's always been a personal favorite of mine. I'm going to go off on a big tangent here, but you can look up plenty of other videos talking about how great Shen and Tai Lung are. By comparison, Kai is a lot more underrated, and I think he deserves more credit, especially because I'd argue they ruined him the most of the old villains in Kung Fu Panda 4. Most people generally agree that Kai has a great presence, design, theme, fighting style, and powers, His weapon is way cooler than just standard issue Kung Fu, and the fact he has to actually control his Jade zombie minions like he's playing an RTS game makes his power more unique than just having standard minions where he just barks orders at them. As far as character depth, though, I do think his backstory with Oogway does contribute a lot. Oogway's social obliviousness was a massive source of frustration for the entire cast of Kung Fu Panda 1. He's the source of pretty much all of the conflict in the plot by not handling things with Tai Lung or the Furious Five in a more delicate manner, instead of just generically saying, "No, Tai Lung, Tigress, neither of you are the Dragon Warrior. That random fat panda is. Deal with it. Now excuse me while I go unalive myself. This is no longer my problem. Bye." Tai Lung just blames Shifu for everything and treats Oogway as some senile old man who can't be reasoned with and more as a force of nature. So it's honestly kind of refreshing to see another new character, Kai, who specifically hates Oogway and treats him as his personal rival. What's more, Kai's backstory with Oogway implies that the Turtle Man was not always some infallible, all-knowing character with no flaws who we should always sympathize with. How is that? Well, we first need to establish Kai has always been 100% evil as far as we know. In Kai's introduction, he goes on about his many menacing titles. Supreme Warlord of all China, Jade Slayer, Master of Pain, Beast of Vengeance, Maker of Widows. There's nothing to imply that Kai is some fallen hero who betrayed Oogway. Kai's only known act of kindness is towards his best friend, who he loved like a brother, the Turtle Man, as he went out of his way to carry his gravely wounded friend to a panda village for days to try to get him healed. Only after this, Kai decides to use the healing in reverse to suck the energy out of people for himself, and Oogway sees this as evil and kills Kai for it. That's good and noble, all on Oogway's part, sure, to stop Kai from doing that, but this minor event clearly is not enough for Kai to earn all of his many evil titles. Trying to suck the souls out of people a single time and failing? Really? That does not sound like it's enough for him to get those 5 titles and be some renowned, infamous villain conqueror. Kai clearly has a past history of evil before this event, so Oogway was willingly participating as a brother-in-arms at Kai's side this entire time. This theory about Kai and Oogway actually got brought up to Stephanie in the interview, and she saw it as a perfectly valid interpretation of Oogway's character. While you don't have to make a ton of mistakes to become wise, it's definitely a lot easier to learn from mistakes rather than just knowing everything right off the bat, and it helps to rationalize his actions in Kung Fu Panda 1 being kind of messy. I'm talking about how Kai made another character better, but that's something that a lot of the best villains are supposed to do, and something Kai doesn't get enough credit for. Shifu would not be a fraction as interesting without his relationship with Tai Lung, and I would argue that Kai also gives that complication to Oogway's character. Most people see Kung Fu Panda 3 and assume Kai just used to be a good guy who turned to evil. But when you realize it's the other way around, that Oogway was the one who saw the light and Kai was just evil to begin with, it makes Kai a lot more interesting too, honestly. Of course, some people might see Kai as boring just because he's entirely evil, but Shen, Panda Exterminator Extraordinaire, is more evil than Kai is and is arguably the most beloved Kung Fu Panda villain. Kai was truly betrayed by Oogway. It wasn't just him seeing it that way irrationally. His best friend stabbed him in the back, and it's the only person he cares about 500 years later. He turned that into an obsession, and when he goes out of his way to destroy everything Oogway ever created and smashes the giant statue of him through the Jade Palace, it goes really hard. Okay. Enough of me gushing about how much I love Kai. Back to Kung Fu Panda 4 and his cameo. Kai being here at all is a blatant, gaping plot hole. Kai's story in his original movie is that he died and was in the spirit realm for 500 years before finally achieving enough power to rake out of it back to the mortal world. At the end of the movie, he's not only forced back to whence he came, but his spirit is entirely destroyed within the spirit realm, so he can never come back in any context ever. Somehow, Chameleon just generically summons him with no explanation. That's pretty bad. But as bad as that is, I would honestly be willing to look past that. I'm not going to say that's like the worst crime here. I love Kai. If you want to give him an actual role, sure, whatever, let's do it. It's unexplained magic. We don't have to explain anything, right? Let's just say that the Chameleon's magic can magically restore Kai. Let's give them this point. Move on. The part that is more offensive is him willingly going to step back into the portal at the end of the movie. Yeah, Shen is arguably more evil than Kai, but Kai is clearly more firmly set in his ways of being evil, when he's been stewing in bitterness over this for 500 years. During those 500 years, Kai's primary goal was to escape the spirit realm. Why would this man, who is a ball of sheer determination, want to ever go back there willingly? I guess you could argue that he wants to go back there to find and defeat Oogway again, but he's had more than enough time to do that and has already done it once successfully. If he wants to go back for the sake of defeating Oogway, he can always just force Poe to send him back like he did during Kung Fu Panda 3. It's not difficult for him to go back. On the other hand, getting out is much harder. The spirit realm is probably very vast considering how long it took Kai to get his collection of absorbed souls, and taking so long to find his hated rival. After Kai is given back his powers, an in-character version of him would go to try to just absorb all the characters around him, just try to kill them all, turn them into jade zombies, steal their powers. Even if he gets forcibly sent back by Poe, it's going to be a head start for him on gathering more power. The resurrected characters here are nobodies besides the 3 villains that I've been talking about, so his only real competition is Shen and Tai Lung. Shen isn't a complete pushover or anything, but he primarily uses cannons to fight, which he does not have access to here. He's entirely unarmed, making him an easy win for Kai. Tai Lung is his only serious opponent, and that could be an interesting debate for which one is stronger, if it weren't for the fact that Kai has already canonically defeated and absorbed Tai Lung in Kung Fu Panda 3. It's a background detail, but Tai Lung's face is on Kai's collection of absorbed souls. With that in mind, an in-character Kai would absolutely go on a berserk rampage and just start absorbing people at the end of Kung Fu Panda 4 as soon as he got the chance, not willingly go into the spirit portal that his entire goal was to escape from. Am I saying that's what should have happened in the movie? No. But I don't know how you write these non-speaking cameo characters so incompetently when they're barely in the movie. No respect or thought is given to Shen or Kai. According to the interview, the voice actors were given contracts where they would be given exponential amounts of money for each subsequent appearance in future movies. This specifically rules out the Furious 5 because they've appeared in 3 movies already, and getting back Tigress would have apparently cost $20 million just for her to say like one line. You know who hasn't appeared in 3 movies? Shen and Kai. They're only in 1 movie each. When this movie is so obsessed with and strongly themed around the villains, it might have been an actually interesting plot to try the movie more centered around them where they're actually allowed to talk. The subplot with the dads is one of the better aspects of the movie, sure, but it's irrelevant to the plot and is really nothing that special. So maybe they could be the necessary cuts? I almost want to even suggest Shifu gets cut, because he barely does anything in the movie, but costs the most money to bring back of anyone besides Jack Black's Poe. Not that Shifu should be doing nothing, of course. Don't get me wrong there. With the extremely limited cast we did get of only 5 returning characters whose voice actors actually got paid, these 3 are the obvious ones to focus on. Shifu is Tai Lung's big rival, given he's the adoptive father of him, and is the main thing that makes Tai Lung interesting beyond just being a badass. Shifu being unable to see what Tai Lung was becoming due to being too proud of his son is his tragic flaw, and is what makes Tai Lung feel so betrayed and furious. Not having the support from his father figure who had been with him from almost day 1 that whole time is what most of his character motivation is. So, you brought back both of these characters, there's barely any other returning characters in the film, what interaction do they have? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They're never on the camera together, they never mention each other's names, even. Stephanie, the only person in the writer's room with any competence, saw this as an obvious mistake and had a plot where Shifu gets kidnapped so that he would be in the same room with Tai Lung at the end of the movie, and they could have a final interaction and make peace with each other. Who needs that kind of closure? More filler and comedy, please. Keep wasting precious screen time on those adorable Psycho Rabbit kids. They're so hilarious. I'm sure that cliche won't ever get overused. They're so funny. Oh, yes, they are. Look at them. Even going with the existing plot of the film, where Shifu would never go into the Chameleon's base, there's an intro scene where Chameleon, disguised as Tai Lung, makes a big point of having returned. Some goats bring up that Tai Lung has returned to Po, but it's made clear roughly 2 minutes later that it's just Chameleon in disguise, so we can't even get Shifu's reaction to a hypothetical of Tai Lung having returned. Even if he did know it was Chameleon already, you think he might have some acknowledgement of Tai Lung's name being just dragged through the mud like that. That's just gotta be depressing when he spent all of his life raising that guy. Tai Lung just gets absolutely no acknowledgement at all from Shifu. So that said, what does Shifu do in the movie? Well, he's just kind of some generic senile old master like Oogway is now. Shifu's only real purpose is to tell Po that he needs to retire from being the Dragon Warrior, which makes no real sense and is just something the writers want Po to do, so they revert Shifu to his Kung Fu Panda 1 characterization, reverting his character development to instead make him a generic strict authority figure. Tai Lung is the only villain treated with any amount of respect, getting an actual fight against Chameleon where he isn't instantly one-shot, which is one of the only decent action sequences. He also gets to insult Po a lot from his cage as a deadpan snarker character, and is probably the closest thing to an enjoyable villain in this movie. He's extremely irrelevant to the plot though, and basically is just here for fan service. I will say for how bad it is that he's ultimately defeated and thrown in a cage, the ending scene is pretty satisfying for him, because he grabs the new villain in a chokehold and takes her into the spirit with him against her will as she cries out in pain. Tai Lung is the only one who might have some possibility of redemption out of the 3 old villains, so it makes sense that he might go back anyway, especially when he has actual dialogue, unlike Shen and Kai, who don't have that luxury. In the movie, that's the end of Tai Lung, but the novelization has a line where Tai Lung and the other villains play jump rope with Chameleon's tongue to torture her. That's honestly pretty amazing, 10 out of 10. It's the most positive visual to come out of this film. It's just a shame that's not in the actual movie. It's mostly just weird that Tai Lung would be 100% friendly with Kai, who has literally done the exact same thing Chameleon has done to him before, but has this passionate hatred for Chameleon. Kai being here especially just opens up 10,000 plot holes. And if you're not going to hire his voice actor, he should really just get deleted from the script. Shen is way more popular anyway, so it would generally make more sense to give him an actual role. Kai can get a throwaway line about Chameleon trying to and failing to resurrect him because he's fully dead, even in the afterlife. Back on Tai Lung, a big theme about the movie is redemption and the ability to change, which mostly happens with the new protagonist, Zen the Fox. Many people before me have suggested that it would be really fun to see Tai Lung go on this redemption arc instead. The film's theme of passing on the title of Dragon Warrior would actually make a lot of sense if it was Tai Lung bringing it up rather than Shifu, given that the title was originally going to him and he wanted it so badly and was denied. Tai Lung can just be motivated by vengeance against Chameleon and not be out of character in helping Po, and we can say that his powers were severely weakened by Chameleon, as happens in the film, so he wouldn't be a huge threat to Po either. That would have made for a way more interesting movie and more justified Tai Lung's return. Of course, I'm not saying Tai Lung should actually become the Dragon Warrior in this hypothetical fan fiction. He still killed tons of innocents, and that's not something you can just undo. So at the end of the movie, then he could willingly go back into the Spirit Realm portal again where he belongs. Redeemed, but his past actions would not be excused. I don't think the role we got for Tai Lung is as bad as it could have been, But even Stephanie thinks that if you brought back Tai Lung, you should bring him back right. She just considers this some sort of generic cameo for him and is not pleased with what happened. I think redeeming Tai Lung would have been the better way to go, and with Tai Lung specifically, the villains are the selling point of the film, and Tai Lung is the only villain you can bring back. So yes, you need to do something more with him than the minor role that you gave him. The film is supposed to be about all three villains coming back, but let's be real, only Tai Lung did. Let's stop pretending that Shen and Kai did. Tai Lung is mostly just a massive amount of missed potential, rather than being actively bad, but his role is so minor that it's not like he can save this movie by himself. When I first came out of the movie, I was more ready to just accept Chameleon as a fourth Kung Fu Panda villain who was just really mediocre rather than actively bad. But what seriously annoyed me was seeing this promotional material. The director, Mike Mitchell, keeps constantly insisting that Chameleon is more powerful than anyone Poe's ever faced. His most powerful villain yet. And it just comes across as spitting in the faces of the previous villains. But especially Kai. Chameleon is just a less interesting ripoff of him. Her power is just a worse version of his. Chameleon copies powers and can only use one at a time, whereas Kai has no limit on what he can absorb and what he can use. He can just casually add everyone's power to his own and just use them all at will. They both copy these powers from people in the spirit realm, so it's pretty direct. If you don't think there's a connection, Kai's title is Kai the Collector, as in Collector of Souls, and Chameleon's name during several years of production was literally just The Collector, until Stephanie made a point of it getting changed because of it being too similar to Kai. Both Kai and Chameleon want power, and say whatever you will about Kai's backstory with Oogway not being quite as complex as Tai Lung or Shen, but I do think it is very valuable and contributes to the universe in a meaningful way. Chameleon does not have a backstory. Mitchell did not want her to have one. Stephanie tried to fight for one, and was not able to get much of anything. Chameleon just wants power. That's it. Her excuse for being evil was that she was unable to be trained in Kung Fu by anyone because she was too small. Which might pass if this was a standalone movie, but it's not. It shows a big lack of knowledge of the universe. Mantis and Viper are both way smaller than Chameleon and were both trained in Kung Fu, but I guess because of their voice actors being fired, they no longer exist. Shifu is in the movie and is blatantly smaller than her and was obviously trained by someone. You can't just say that the area Chameleon grew up in was really nasty and wouldn't train her either, because everyone around the area knows who Shifu is. They specifically have a line that makes a point of that. So no, she knows who Shifu is. While Poe and Oogway are bigger than Chameleon, they are also far from the ideal physique, with Poe constantly being mocked by everyone for being fat, and Oogway being slow as molasses. So yeah, Chameleon has zero excuse here. She did not look very hard to find someone who would be willing to train her. That's not to say Chameleon needs some amazing backstory for me to like the character. I like plenty of villain characters with no depth just because they enjoy being evil a lot and are very competent and are charismatic. And Chameleon could have easily been one of those characters if she was handled better. Until the last third or so of the movie, her only real scene she gets as her big scene to show how villainous she is one where she threatens the mob bosses of her city to give her more tribute. This has the setup to be a decent scene, and I was getting excited as it started. She's in the disguise of a crocodile there, and uses that to watch about how the other mob bosses talk about her behind her back. She eventually reveals herself when the bear insults her and starts threatening him. Then she turns into an elephant and looks really angry. It looks like she's gonna kill him, so the audience can see how evil she is and be afraid of her. Then all she does is push the guy down some stairs. So scary. I know it's a kid's movie about talking animals, but this is the same franchise where Poe is constantly falling downstairs as a gag with no injuries. Shifu outright throws Poe down the stairs in the first movie. Is he some irredeemable villain now? The stairs are used for comic relief. I have to assume something more intimidating is supposed to be here, like she pushes the guy off a cliff or something, But executives came in and said, No, that's too violent. This is a kid's movie. You can't do that. This is a comedy. This franchise doesn't shy away from letting the villains kill people in the past. Again, I have to remind you about the peacock's ultimate solution to the panda population problem. That was a thing that happened in this series, that apparently got the pass on being child-friendly. But the people in charge of Kung Fu Panda 4 wanted to play it way more safe than that. Another thing Mitchell says about Chameleon is insisting she's more of a brain than brawn kind of villain, which I would say he failed at spectacularly with this character. Chameleon is never portrayed as weak beyond her primary form being small, but her primary form is 100% irrelevant. She never uses it in combat. Her shape-shifting is supposedly sorcery, but she's never doing anything remotely magical looking when she does it. It looks like she can just do it at will, like it's some physical ability of hers. Her favorite form is the stupid giant elephant that knocks the bear down the stairs. She uses that the most of any form she has. She really comes across as more of a brute than anything else, when that's how she prefers to look. Not to say that Tai Lung and Kai are dumb, but the only real brain over brawn villain in the franchise for me is Shen. They actually made a point of him being physically average at best, and having to rely on his use of weapons to be threatening. Let's go more into the Chameleon's stupidity to emphasize how she's really just a dumb brute character, and not some conniving schemer character that she's supposed to be. For her to be able to revive dead characters and steal their powers, she needs the Jade Staff, which is in Poe's possession. For some arbitrary reason, she needs to do it at a certain point in time for a blood moon to be there, which means this is really, really urgent. It is a plot rule that due to magic, the Jade Staff has to be willingly given and not stolen, so she has to somehow convince Poe to give it to her or one of her minions, who can then give it to her directly. How does she go about accomplishing this? She does nothing and sits in her generic Bowser castle while sending her minion Zen the Fox to go do it for her. Zen tries to convince Poe that he needs her to track down Chameleon, and because Poe does absolutely no research, he immediately trusts a convicted criminal who tried to kill him. Chameleon's palace is insanely prominent and huge, and everybody in her city is always terrified of her because she's the ruler. She would not be remotely difficult to find. Zen goes on a long journey with Poe to gain his trust and to try to get him to give it to her, while all of Chameleon's minions attack them because Zen is pretending to be a good guy. If they ever actually killed Zen or Poe, then the whole plan would be wasted and Chameleon would not be able to get the staff that she wants, because Poe would be dead and then he couldn't give the staff away. You see how that's kind of stupid? The minions aren't in on the plan or anything, and Zen is an outlaw with tons of wanted posters of her in the city. So Chameleon is antagonizing her best ally by accident because she is too lazy to do anything. Keep in mind, this goal is time sensitive. She must have the staff by a certain time, and she's this careless about it? Now, Chameleon, hear me out. You are a shapeshifter. All you have to do is go up to the Jade Palace and turn into some member of the Furious Five to get him to give you the staff. They're all off on their own missions or whatever. I guess you can't because we don't have their voice actors. Fine. Turn into Shifu, I guess, or one of Poe's dads. Anything. Point is, Poe is not remotely hard to manipulate and trick with an ability as overpowered as shape-shifting. She almost never uses shape-shifting for manipulation, though. It's almost exclusively used for fighting, so she can be generically big and strong. Totally a brains over brawn villain. The dumbest thing she does is during the climax of the film. She gives Poe back the Jade Staff for no reason because she doesn't need it, due to being generically overconfident after having absorbed the energy from all of the old villains. The staff is extremely overpowered and is able to defeat her in 1 or 2 hits, and Poe is able to use the staff to suck the energy back out of her to the rightful owners of it. Poe even opens up the infamous Spirit Realm portal, which results in her getting outright killed by Tai Lung as he drags her back through it. Chameleon was defeated by her own stupidity. The writers had no excuse to get the staff back in Poe's possession other than Chameleon being generically overconfident. You know who else is defeated by themselves, and there's an actual point in the writing? It is prophesied that Shen will be defeated by a panda, so he kills all the pandas to try to stop that prophecy from coming true. This indirectly creates Po, leading to Shen's own demise. That's how you write an actual interesting villain and make a point of them defeating themselves, instead of it being lazy writing. Chameleon, for some reason, only wants to absorb villains and nobody else. She doesn't have to revive people from the spirit realm to absorb them. She could just steal Po's energy from him directly if she wanted to and call it a day. She even has Po, like, in a cage right in front of her and chooses to not do that. Even sticking to dead people, she could probably at least do the soul suction on Oogway instead of Shen, since Shen isn't all that competent in combat. But no, the writers specifically want it to be villains only. The point of this is to market the return of the franchise's beloved villains, but also to emphasize that she's better than the previous villains because she defeats and copies them all. The only real reason it's done is for real-life marketing, with no reason why she's specifically obsessed with villains in-universe. Honestly, making her a villain fangirl could be a lot of fun and give her some much-needed characterization. Po is the literal fanboy of the Furious Five on the hero side, outright owning action figures of the main characters. So making Chameleon be a fangirl for villains could be entertaining, and offer her some more interesting interactions as a dark mirror of Po. Maybe she could even work alongside them as allies instead of humiliating them and trapping them in cages. That could actually be interesting, and justify hiring the voice actors back. Eventually, she could potentially be bullied by the other villains she revived, and then she could betray them and start using their abilities. I'm not going to write some full script for the idea of this video or anything. I'm just offering to expand on one of the only not generic character traits she could potentially have. Okay, so Chameleon is a dumb brute villain character. Got it. Can she at least give us a half-decent fight, or at the bare minimum, maybe she can be flashy like Kai is since she's a ripoff of him? Well, I'm not going to pretend that there's absolutely nothing here. This film does have some good action sequences, but overall, no, not really. The best thing she has is this really cool giant chimera she turns into that's legitimately awesome looking. And taking multiple parts from different characters and shape-shifting rather than just generically copying someone is a super cool idea. This is also the only time where Kai and Shen are slightly relevant in the script. She says Kai's name as she grows horns, and Shen's name as she grows wings. As she does it, it cuts to their faces scowling at her using their likeness. Honestly, pretty cool. This is also the only time where she actually mixes and matches powers like Kai does, rather than just copying a single person at a time. So, we got this cool chimera form. What are we gonna do with it? It gets generically defeated by Po in 60 seconds. It just flies up into the air, then Po gets on its back and forces it to crash into the ground. 60 measly seconds, it's pathetic. Then she's turning into other, much less impressive things again and just copying other characters again. She never comes across as that competent or having the upper hand in battle, and doesn't stand a chance against Po after she gives over the Jade Staff. Even in-universe, Po doesn't find her threatening after a certain point, as he intentionally holds back after finishing her off, so that Zen can do it and get the experience points for killing Chameleon instead. It's just pathetic. Totally Po's greatest villain. Maybe if Tai Lung said some mocking, sarcastic comment about her being the greatest villain before he grabbed her, I could be charitable about it, with her just claiming to be because she's so full of herself. But the marketing trying to pretend she's so great really rubs me the wrong way. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. If you enjoyed what you saw, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. And if you're craving more movie discussions, consider checking out the interview with Stephanie linked in the description below. It's a goldmine of insights into Kung Fu Panda 4 and its ridiculous development journey. Can you believe they actually considered making Chameleon a human from Human City? Crazy, right? Now I want to hear from you guys. What would you have liked to see in Kung Fu Panda 4? Drop your thoughts in the comments, or if you're up for some in-depth conversation, join our Discord community. Despite its flaws, Kung Fu Panda 4 has sparked some fascinating discussions and brought fans together in unexpected ways. It certainly made me appreciate the films a lot more than I did. What's your guys' take on it all? Let's keep the conversation going.